Baxter. We have
Back.
a continuation. We're back.
Back, man.
Good to be here.
I know Bill Winn. I know it's on his heart to talk about union. So we'll give him first go.
Yeah, come on.
What's on your mind about that? A heart, Bill? Union with Jesus.
Yeah, I think for me, that's the thread that I see that's running through this grace explosion right now is that we are all in union with Jesus, and then the walk or the conversation that we need to have is, what does that look like? How does that play out in our lives? I mean, what does it look like to say that a person living in some remote corner of the world that's never heard the name Jesus, to say they're in union with Jesus? What does that look like? How does it differ from, other concepts that maybe come close or try to, like common grace or some other things like that? But I see union, Baxter, in your theology. I think
so.
I know I've read everything you've written, and I think I've listened to every lecture you've ever given. That's the thread that I see, and in the beginning for me, I think the first thing I ever read of yours was it was God is for us, and it was 2006, and I was sitting in my office. I was at home by myself, and I got to chapter 4. And I grew up in the church I grew up in, our faith tradition. You didn't even so much as like put a hand up in worship, like everybody was very stoic and, keep your hands down by your side. The only person that was able to raise their hands in worship was the worship leader. And he did this military counting the cadence for you. And
Right.
so any kind of charismatic expression was foreign to me. And I got to chapter 4, and God is for us. And I jumped out of my chair in my office at home with such force that my chair overturned in the floor, and I ran out the back, down off the deck, and ran around my backyard about 3 times, waving my arms in the air and screaming at the top of my lungs, because I had never heard anything that was that good. And when I got done, I was getting ready to walk back in the house. I looked over, and my neighbor, Tanya, was watering flowers, looking at me like this, because we just moved in. We'd only been there about a year. And she's like, well, this preacher has lost his mind.
Either he's got something smoked that's pretty good.
Yeah, so I didn't say anything. I just waved at her and went in the house and, kept reading. But
you said chapter 4.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have the book in front of me. It's on the shelf over there, but
somewhere, huh?
That started it for me. God is for us, the mediation of Christ, and the mystery of Christ and why we don't get it by Capon. Those 3. Mm-hmm. Tim Brissell sent me those, and I read them all in a week, and it just blew things wide open. And I slowly started to see it. When I read my Bible, I started to see union. I started taking this little Greek word, this little Greek preposition, en. I started taking it literally, and I started looking for it. like the Word was made flesh and made his dwelling among us. No, the Greek word there is en. He made his dwelling in us, right? Mm-hmm. And and then
that word can be translated among. All prepositions have nuances, but what's really fascinating in Galatians, where Paul says that when God was pleased, who set me apart from my mother's womb, was pleased to reveal his Son in me, not among me.
Right.
Yeah. And then the next verse, Paul Young pointed this out. I had not really gone any further just looking carefully. The next verse, he says, in order that I might preach him. And then it translates the same in as among the Gentiles. And it's like, wait a minute. God was pleased to reveal his Son in me that I might preach him in the Gentiles.
Come on.
So, at that preposition, man, you start looking that up in Paul and in John. The very first word in this gospel is in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think he's already messing with our minds there, because it does mean in the beginning, but he's got so many layers that are going on. But that, for me, that is why I went to Scotland to study with J.B. Torrance and to do my work on T.F. Torrance, is because I had seen that same thing in Athanasius. Not only the goodness of God,
Yeah.
but I'd seen this sense of the incarnation means that God has, and this violates every bit of the Greek world, that God has become a human being, and not only a human being, but he has united himself with us in our sin and alienation and darkness. And that double union, the union of Jesus with his Father and the Holy Spirit, and now his union with us, and not just our humanity, but our humanity twisted. It's like, okay, that then became for Athanasius and certain key figures in the early church, that became a hermeneutic. It's like, this is it. This is the light. The light is this double union that is the person of Jesus. And it's like, whoa, man, I got to rethink everything I thought I knew. You got to pull the thread on that rug, and everything that we've learned pretty much comes on. As you pull that thread, it just gets unwound. But then you turn around and realize there's a whole new carpet being woven behind you.
Yeah.
In the spirit, based on union. And blessedly, it's a subject now that people talk about. It was not that way 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Very few people talked about it. But it radically changes our basic perception. There's no longer anything as just Bill Winn. This is kind of dovetailing back with our sacred sector discussion. There is no just Jason.
Yeah.
There is no just a human person.
Yeah.
There's only human beings bound up in the person of Jesus. And that bound up. And John 14:20 to me became way back when I first, this has probably been 40 years ago, and I just stared at the verse thinking, how could you say that, Jesus? Because it's clear he doesn't mean, he says, in that day you shall know that I am in the Father.
Come on.
And y'all, us, are in me, and I'm in you. All of that's placed under the category of what's finished before we were even here. It's like, this is what we are to believe in a real union that's already established in Jesus, not in a possibility that I can, by my faith, or if you're in the Roman Catholic Church, with the way they understand baptismal regeneration, the child is born outside, but when the waters of baptism, then they're included. And it's like both of those, as T.F. Torrance points out, if you think you're united by faith, or if you think you're united by baptism, both of those are preaching a conditional gospel, and they're giving a place for us to accomplish our salvation,
right,
in one way or another. But in his book, T.F.'s book, The School of Faith, which he wrote in, I think 1959, which would have been a year after I was born. He has a long introduction to the all the catechisms and all that Reformed tradition, and he hammers this whole thing. And I remember reading it when I was in seminary. I just thought, oh my gosh, how can this be? And then I realized, well, it's in Calvin too. And not only that, but I looked up we were using Louis Berkhoff's systematic theology in our classes at Reformed Theological Seminary, in the theology classes. And I remembered staring at page 447, because I'll never forget it. I can see it on the page right now. He's talking about union with Christ, and he distinguishes the Reformed view from the Lutheran. He says the Lutheran view is subjective, is that union with Christ is the fruit of our faith. And Berkhoff, high Calvinist, says this is backwards, that the union with Christ is predicated first upon the eternal plan of God, second upon the historical realization of the incarnation. And he says it's manifest that union with Christ is not the fruit of our faith, that union with Christ produces faith. Faith is the fruit of a prior union. And I just thought, well, how can all this other stuff be, and how can the so-called evangelical world stand up and be preaching that it's a mere possibility? And if it's possible, then the object of my faith is not Jesus in me,
Yeah.
but Jesus can be if I
Yes.
believe. And it's
Yes.
just a little circle.
Yes.
If I believe, well, what happens if I have a bad hair day and my faith falters a little bit? Where is Jesus then, and where is he in relation to me? And what if I'm like the guy, was it Thomas? Lord, I believe, help my unbelief.
Huh.
Where does that mean? We're
Right.
just in limbo, somewhere hanging out there, kind of united, but kind of not.
Yeah.
And so the object of faith is then not the Father's love embracing us and uniting himself with Jesus. That's what Calvin says. The object of faith is God's mercy that's revealed to us in Jesus.
Mm.
And so that's not the object of faith. The object of faith is really my faith. If I'm believing right, then these things are going to get connected. I'm going to get united with Jesus then. And that just produces hiding, because then you have to act like you don't have bad hair days, or you don't have.
Right.
So I ask people a lot when I travel, who here at this meeting has moved beyond, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And if we haven't moved beyond that, then we're not really united with Jesus yet. Maybe partially, but it's just that creates insanity. It creates fear. It creates focus on yourself rather than astonishment that Jesus has united himself with us, not only in our humanity, but in our broken humanity. And he has fulfilled the Father's heart. And now we can see who God is and who we are, and we can start rethinking some things. But in his introduction, that's magisterial. There's probably 3 or 4 pages where he's dealing exactly with that. Quite beautiful. Some people call that objective union, because then they want to talk about subjective union, which is when we believe. But I'm like, Jesus lumps, in that day you will know that I'm the one that has union with the Father, and you're in me. I've included you in my union with the Father, and I'm in you. All that's objective.
Yeah.
Now the subjective part is when, as we do begin to believe it, and when we have the dark times in our lives, or maybe dark seasons, we keep gazing back on the fact of it. I'm united with him. He did that.
Yeah.
Later on in my journey, probably the last 15 years, I've seen more and more that that we did have something to do with our union with Jesus, and that is we damned him. And we cursed him, and he submitted himself to that. Our damning him, we poured our wrath out on him, and he submitted himself to us. John's Gospel, chapter 18, is a stunningly beautiful way he presents that. But in that, we opened the door of our wound to Jesus to bow down and submit himself and surrender himself to that. And he brought his Father and the Holy Spirit with him. That's when he made John 14:20 real.
Yeah.
Well, our vote was to damn him, crucify him.
It's so good.
It's everything.
It's very good.
So good.
I love the both of you told stories that those moments. I often will point back to 16 years ago and call it my second salvation experience, if you will. But I can point to all of these spots in my life, and I think everyone can point to when they actually heard the good news.
Yeah.
And they actually realized, even if they didn't have language for it or understanding for it, these explosive revelations. Baxter, if you're reading it and going, wait a sec, how is this? These are those moments where we actually are living truly, fully alive and experiencing. I can't read, John 14 without getting emotional. My heart burns as you guys talk. I can take you back to mowing my yard, and having
Such a secular activity. Me and Jesus.
You don't mean to say that Jesus met you in something as mundane as cutting the grass, do you?
My sweaty sincerity of didn't have enough money to actually have grass. It was mostly dirt.
Yeah.
Mowing the dirt. Yeah. And having a moment of revelation. Wait a second. I'm living from the above and beyond all you can ask her. And my neighbors would have thought, what is going on with that guy? what is going on with that guy? Because he's crying and he's laughing and he's saying, God, if you want to live, if I live in this space where I can't afford to put grass seed down the rest of my life, but I have a revelation, I can live in this ever increasing revelation of our oneness.
Yeah.
And here we are. I do think we're in a moment where folks, thanks to pioneers like yourself, Baxter, and those who came before you, who have been faithfully beating the drum of the gospel message in such a moment I get emotional. We're in a moment where we get to have these glorious conversations, and I'm hearing it over and over resonate with folks who are remembering their first love. Because salvation, when you give your heart to Jesus, even when you're limited in your understanding and you are limited in that prodigal moment of your life, you experience a father running to you. You experience him lifting his robes and running to you, and you experience this oneness, even if you don't have language to it. And here we are in a moment where I think language is being put to it, clarity being brought to it. And I'm grateful to you guys.
People are hungry.
Yeah.
People are hungry for it.
Yeah.
Because we've lived out religion. I mean, Bill, you've probably got hundreds of stories on that just from your years as being a pastor, but we've lived out trying to get there.
Yeah.
We've lived under the tutelage of people who would tell us this is how you do it.
Yeah.
These are things you do. You try harder, you give more, you pray more earnestly, you give your heart to Jesus, and you come to church and you do things that are spiritual. And it's like, I would say the vast majority of Christians in the West, they're not saying anything about it, but they know that, well, if that's it, that doesn't fit what Jesus promised. He promised life.
Yeah.
Not like leaving your body behind and going to heaven when you die and back into the invisibles. That's the Greeks. But we've been trying to get into something that we were created in, and we've never been separated from. The only issue is we've lost our minds, and we don't see it. And when you don't see what is, you create something that you can see. And then you try to get that built up, because somehow if your successful ministry to a distant God is really true, one among several thousand options on how to get this thing worked out, but the proof is going to be size.
Right.
In our country anyway.
Yeah.
That's the proof.
Sure.
That God's hand's upon us. And I'm like, man, wow. This union is so beautiful. It's so real.
Yeah.
And it's important. It's critical in every part of our life. It affects our health. It affects everything. Jason, I'll tell you a quick story, if I can make it quick. There's my baby girl who is transferring to another college for her junior year. She's going away to study psychology and criminal justice. She wants to be an investigator. So, yeah. But when it was her first birthday. We were having this little family birthday party, and my phone rang, and it was one of my church members, and she was frantic, and she was telling me about her husband's Aunt Mary. And she was in the hospital. She had tried to kill herself, and she didn't know which hospital she was in. Well, it was like, in central Virginia, I'm in Hanover County, but in the area, there's 7 or 8 big hospitals, So I just, where she live, So I go to, this is back before we all had smartphones. I go to my computer and I look on MapQuest and this is her address and what hospitals. And so I start calling hospitals, and nobody will tell me anything because she's a psych patient. And I don't have this number, right? So finally, I got this elderly black lady at MCV in downtown Richmond, Virginia, and she says, well, honey, I'm not allowed to tell you that Mary Ann Thomas is on the 7th floor in room such and such. That would be a violation. And she hung up the phone. I did manage to get in a God bless you, and she hung up the phone. So I got dressed and I went, and I was 36, 37, and brand new pastor, and absolutely unprepared for a moment like that. And so what she had done is she took a bunch of pills, and that didn't work. So she drank a bottle of peroxide behind it, and that didn't work. And so then she got a butcher knife and laid down in her bed and stabbed herself in the abdomen a bunch of times. And And that didn't work, but she'd lost so much blood, she broke the glass on the nightstand that she'd used to swallow the pills and started sawing away at her throat. And so when I'm standing in front of these double doors, these metal stainless steel doors, and I'm waiting for them to open them, and I'm just praying. I said, Holy Spirit, I have nothing to say. I don't know what to say. I'm not even going to go in there and pretend to know what to say. So I'm not going to open my mouth until you open it. So I sat down in front of her, and she was tied down like an animal with a trach tube, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I get why she had to be restrained, but she was having a pretty bad day already,
Yeah.
and that just made it worse. And my heart just broke for this lady. I'd never met her before. She's in her early 70s, or late 60s maybe. And I just sat there for probably 10 minutes, and big tears just streaming down her face. I mean, I told her who I was, and that her family had sent me, but I opened my mouth, and this is what came out. I said, you belong to the Father, Son, and Spirit. You always have. You always will. The Father loves you, and he likes you. You are his beloved child.
Come on.
And then I just stayed silent and prayed silently, and 5 minutes later, I repeated it, and then, I don't know, after about an hour, I just looked at her and I said, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And I went back every day, and we talked. I did all the talk. She had a trach tube. She was writing on a little pad. And long story short, that woman was completely transformed just by knowing she didn't have to perform and earn her way in, that God already loved her. And then a year later, she met Baxter and Paul when they, in 2008, when they came to our church here in Richmond. And she fell in love with those two boys. And I mean, they called her on the phone even to check up on her. And when she finally passed, she got cancer, and she finally passed. And I went the last time I saw her at the nursing home, I said, Marianne, how are you doing? And she looked at me with the biggest smile, and she says, well, I hope I'm dying, because I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go be with Jesus face to face.
Wow.
And I said, well, Mary, I said, I have a favor I want to ask you. I said, I haven't told your story outside of our church. Everybody at the church knows your story because they were all praying for you.
Yeah.
I said, but I haven't told that story. I said, but if you give me permission, I'll tell it, because I think it'll bless a lot of people.
Yeah, well.
And she said, Bill, you tell it to anybody you want to. I mean, she was completely transformed. I mean, she grew up in church.
Yeah.
She loved Jesus,
Yeah.
but she could never get it right. She could never perform well enough. And when she found out that she had been in union with the Father, Son, and Spirit before the foundations of the world were laid, it took all of that pressure off of her.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it changed everything.
Changed it all.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm talking about. That's when we're telling our stories and we're actually describing something that was real. Why I'm throwing my arms up in the yard as I'm mowing, I'm coming into just a moment of awareness that I've always been in my Father. That, and everything shifts, everything changes, and then like you said, Baxter, you start rethinking, you start weaving the rug behind you. You don't even know you're doing it. That's beautiful. Whew.
Man, that's a beautiful analog. That's a beautiful thought, Baxter, about the unraveling the rug of our fallen mythologies. And as it unravels, the Father, Son, and Spirit are redeeming it and weaving it into.
Yeah, that's powerful.
That
Yeah,
is,
and then when you realize
consider that stolen.
I'll give you credit, though. I'll give you credit for the first three times.
The first time, yeah.
well, the beautiful thing is you take that story to another level, and the rug is you in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's being woven is you're being woven into a sacrament, a living, embodied expression of the life of the Father, Son, and Spirit.
Yeah.
That's their dream.
Yeah.
And they're not doing it without our participation. And they take whatever we bring to the table, even if it's a bunch of, scubala, theologically speaking, and they're going to weave it.
Yeah.
They're going to weave it. And we don't even see it. I think it takes us a lot of years when you can look back and think, I thought I was doing this and this and this for God. Now I'm embarrassed about that. But what God was actually doing in and through me was a whole different thing.
Right.
And that's, Mary Ann's like that revelation, like, wait a minute, the despair. And that's where we are right now, I think, across the world, is you have a growing despair on the part of good people.
Yeah.
They've been there, they've done that, they've tried, they've worked really hard, and they're honestly good people trying to walk with Jesus and in their own way. And they're despairing inside, can't really talk about it. And at the same time, the Lord is raising up prophets, evangelists, whatever you want to call them, who are recovering the ancient vision of union of the early church, of the apostles and the early church. And when those two things meet, man, and you can't hide that. And that's, to me, I can see it. When I walk in a room and turn around, I can see all these faces that are lit up with simple relief.
Yeah.
And that what almost took Mary Ann out was the frustration of having to get it right and knowing you couldn't do it. And then the simple relief and the joy of knowing that I'm included. And people that are on the outside working hard to get in hear that and think, well, that's just easy believism. And I'm thinking, no, that is serious, profound, personal relief that leads to gratitude and joy. And you can't hide those things. And that creates conversations with people around you because they see it. And they don't necessarily know what it is. And it doesn't even have to be a religious conversation. They just kind of want to hang out around it because it's some freedom.
And I love the simplicity of what Holy Spirit gave you to say, because that is, I've watched you guys do that. I've watched, Baxter, you're sitting there, somebody asks, you preach this beautiful message, and then there's a Q&A and somebody asks a convoluted religious question, trying to figure it out. And I've watched you go, nah. What is it that you said to her? Basically, Bill, it's that.
You belong to the Father, Son, and Spirit. You always have. You always will. The Father loves you. He likes you. You are His beloved child.
I mean, this is the message. That's the ministry.
Across all worlds, He came.